The only way we can go after them in Pakistan is from bases in Afghanistan. The SEAL team that killed Osama bin Laden flew out of a helicopter base in Afghanistan. Had it tried to accomplish that mission from an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean, you can be sure it would have failed. It's just too far. The drones that put unrelenting pressure on al-Qaeda every day in Pakistan all fly out of Afghanistan. Without bases in Afghanistan, we'd be able to put no pressure on al-Qaeda in Pakistan. And I think we saw very dramatically on May 1st last year that Pakistan is in a very ambiguous relationship, even with the highest leaders of al-Qaeda, like Osama bin Laden, who wasn't hiding in a cave in the mountains. He was hiding in the front yard of the Pakistani army.
Nobody can guarantee whether or not al-Qaeda can come back. What is in all circumstances going to be a very weak Afghan state will not be able to prevent some al-Qaeda people coming there, basing themselves there, travelling through. But what I think can be prevented, certainly in the context of a peace deal with the Taliban, if that is achieved, is to prevent al-Qaeda setting up the kind of bases and training camps that it had before 9/11 in Afghanistan.
Objective 3, topple the Taliban regime. Before the September 11 attacks, Afghanistan under Taliban rule was already a pariah state. When the Pakistan-backed movement took power in 1996, it imposed a strict regime of Sharia law and killed thousands of civilians. The Taliban's brutal treatment of women attracted international condemnation. But it was their refusal to unconditionally surrender Osama bin Laden and other al-Qaeda leaders which led to war with the United States and allies like Australia.
The Taliban were brilliantly and very quickly defeated in 2001. It's clear in retrospect that they'd lost the confidence of the vast majority of Afghans. But with a safe haven in Pakistan and with the active support of the Pakistani Army and Intelligence Service, the Taliban have staged one of the great military comeback stories of the last 50 years.
They came back again in 2003, and with support, they increased their activity in 2005. So there was a real time window there of 2 years at least, where it would have been quite possible to craft a new structure that worked and was based on a genuine reconciliation. But it didn't happen.
By 2002, so confident was the coalition that the job of defeating the Taliban was done, that Australia withdrew virtually all combat troops from Afghanistan, only to send them back in 2005.
I mean, you might argue, well, we should have left them all there, but I can tell you if we'd left them, we had all left all of our forces there, no matter what anybody was saying about Iraq, we'd have been heavily criticised for keeping forces in a country after the immediate objective had been achieved. Bear in mind that the objective was not indefinite occupation.
A resurgent Taliban reached the peak of its success in 2009, when it threatened 80% of Afghanistan. In April of that year, Kevin Rudd announced a 40% increase in Australian troops, bringing the total number on the ground to 1,550, more than 10 times Australia's original commitment in 2001.
We can only do, in my view, what we've been asked to do. And from a military commander, when I was there, all I could ask of my soldiers was to do the mission that we've been assigned. Train the Afghan forces in Kyrgyzstan province to the best of our ability. And that's all we can do. We can't solve Afghanistan. Australia can't solve Afghanistan.
In America, President Obama bowed to pressure from his Afghanistan generals and agreed to a troop surge of 30,000.
These additional American and international troops will allow us to accelerate handing over responsibility to Afghan forces and allow us to begin the transfer of our forces out of Afghanistan.
Debate still rages over how effective Obama's Afghanistan surge has been.
The Taliban have adopted more of an urban assassination and bombing tactic because they can't operate so freely in the countryside, and as a consequence, you know, there's an improvement in security and stability in the countryside. That said, in the same time frame, the insurgency has gotten worse in the east and has spread to the north and the west. So this is a side effect of not having enough troops to do the job across the country simultaneously. We had to press in one area, and we certainly have reduced Taliban activity there, but they've sort of spread around and moved to other areas as we've done that.
At some point, this will fall apart, and if we don't change anything, my assessment is that this will end in a strategic defeat for the United States and the entire coalition. And at some point, that cannot be hidden by positive words. If all of your actual evidence shows that when you leave somewhere, the Taliban immediately comes back in, then what possible rationale could you place to say, but this time when we leave 23,000 in the next 6 months, well, that's going to work, that's going to stay. Or and then, you know, the remainder of the 68,000 by the end of 2014, ostensibly, and all the rest of the NATO forces, upon what do you have to base that that's going to succeed and they're going to stand when they haven't everywhere else? Where are we still there?
The problem was that the United States then went on, after 2001, to develop this idea of essentially eliminating the Taliban altogether, excluding the Taliban from Afghanistan. As has become very apparent, that cannot be done.
Objective 4. Help the Afghan people through development, education and democracy. The war may have begun as a pursuit of Al-Qaeda, but lofty ideals of helping Afghanistan's people were quickly grafted on to justifications for the invasion.
We see the work that's being done and the progression being done. I think if we weren't here, the progression of construction would be extremely slow. They would still carry on with their lives, but we're giving them a step up, I believe. So
it took 7 weeks to kick, you know, the remaining Al-Qaeda guys out of Afghanistan. Then at the Bonn conference in late 2001 and early 2002, there was a very maximalist set of nation-building objectives kind of tacked onto that military objective. And I think over time, people have realised that that was just far too ambitious a set of ideas for the resources that we allocated to it.
It's been estimated that of the $62 billion in aid pledged by international donors since Bonn in 2001, only 5% reached local Afghans.
Incredible sums have gone to Western officials and aid workers in Kabul. Even bigger sums have gone to contractors with enormous profits, enormous overheads, enormous payments for security. Huge payments have been made to consultants, many of whom have hardly actually done any work in Afghanistan. And then, of course, when money is given to the Afghan authorities, so much of it has been stolen and disappeared in the form of corruption.
Do you know Afghans call international assistance aeroplane aid? I don't know if you've ever heard that term. They say it flies from the west, touches down in Afghanistan and flies right back to the west. I think it's very true that a lot of the money that's been allocated has been wasted or has actually had a negative effect because it's created money that's either gone to the enemy or gone to corrupt warlords or corrupt officials who've then used it to oppress or abuse the ordinary population, and it's created instability.
The opportunities now available to women and girls have certainly improved, particularly in major cities like Kabul. Only 5,000 girls were in school in 2001. Now 2.7 million are being educated across Afghanistan.
Quantitatively, there are much more schools. There's probably from less than 30, now 205. There's madrasas, but most of the gains are for boys. So, I mean, you could say they're making some progress in education, but you unfortunately still have a fairly conservative society. And so while things for women have changed, there's a big, big difference between urban and rural centers.